safe ways to do things, so thank you. I want to thank our legislative sponsors and the bipartisan group of legislators, nearly unanimous, who supported this bill. Our incredible Senate President Leroy Garcia is with us, Senator Rhonda Fields, Representative Selena Gonzalez Gutierrez, and Representative Leslie Herod. Really, without their hard work and dedication, we wouldn't be where we are today. I also want to thank the Colorado Black Legislative Caucus, the Latinx Legislative Caucus. We have many others who are joining us here today. Speaker Becker, Majority Leader Garnett, Senator Tate, Colonel Packard, Sheriff Pelley, Director of Public Safety Stan Hilke, former sheriff, Elizabeth Epps, District Attorney Michael Doherty, many others who really came together around a really challenging issue that has eluded Colorado and eluded our nation for far too long. I am so proud to sign this bill today on the 155th anniversary of Juneteenth. This marks the day that news of freedom finally came to enslaved African Americans in Galveston, Texas, the last enclave of the defeated Confederacy. But as we know, Juneteenth, though of course we celebrate today, and today we give meaning to that celebration by signing an important bill, did not mark the end of racism in our country, nor did it even begin to end the racial inequities that really plague so many aspects of American society. It took another century of protest and collective action to even end state-sanctioned segregation and bring about key civil rights and voting rights legislation in the 1960s. And the struggle for equality continues to this day and through this day. We've seen this struggle play out in a powerful fashion in the last few weeks in communities large and small across our state and country as millions of Americans have become part of our nation's largest civil rights demonstrations in half a century. This is a long overdue moment of national reflection. And as a 17-year-old black student named Ashira Campbell told me yesterday, it's not just a protest against police brutality, but a protest against a society that is too comfortable with injustice. It's up to those of us in government, our elected officials, to hear the undeniable, unassailable message of these demonstrations and the voices of those who deserve to be addressed. The vision that every American deserves the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, regardless of race. That Black Americans specifically deserve to feel safe going for a run in our neighborhoods, walking to the convenience store, watching birds at the park, interacting with the police, or just being in their own homes. And that we cannot wait any longer to knock down institutional racism born out of America's original sin of slavery. Now, this legislation specifically contains landmark evidence-based reforms that not only protect civil rights, but will help restore trust between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. This bill that I'm about to sign bans chokeholds. It creates new standards for the use of force, including not using deadly force when a person is only suspected of a minor or nonviolent offense. It includes requiring all peace officers who interact with the public wear body cameras. Many do already, but this will make sure that going forward, that will be phased in across all law enforcement activities in our state. Allowing individuals, really creating a new duty for police officers to intervene if they see a fellow officer engaging in an inappropriate use of force, instead of just standing by and watching. Requiring peace officers to have a legal basis for making contact with individuals, and after making that contact, reporting the perceived demographic data, and requiring new data reporting on the use of force. This is a meaningful, substantial reform bill. And of course, credit goes to the bill sponsors, who I acknowledged, to those working on these issues for many years, but also to the tens of thousands of Coloradans who have raised their voices to protest injustice. And it was inspiring to see Republicans and Democrats from very different walks of life not only vote for this legislation, but also give passionate speeches about the reason why these reforms are necessary. The unity of the vote in Colorado General Assembly in the House and Senate reflects the unity we see in our streets, old and young, white, brown, and black, gay and straight, men and women, Republicans, independents, and Democrats, taking a stand, echoing the righteous refrain that Black lives matter. I was glad to see law enforcement officers link arm in arm with demonstrators demanding justice for George Floyd and others, and work in good faith with legislators on these important issues. We're going to need to continue to work with law enforcement to get this right and to make sure that there is transparency and accountability, because our peace officers do good and important work in our communities every single day. Those who run towards danger, never questioning for a moment their sworn duty to protect and serve. And we recognize and appreciate that work and the sacrifices that they make to serve our communities. You know, a childhood friend of mine from Boulder, now a peace officer named Vinny Montez, shared some thoughts the other day that were a reminder of the very tough challenges facing our society. Vinny was raised by hardworking parents that cleaned homes and businesses to provide opportunities for their families, and they really taught Vinny to be inclusive and creative and show love for everyone. And it was those values that led him to become an officer, and he served his community for the last 22 years. Vinny wrote, "For the first time in my professional career, I'm deeply hurt because I've concluded that too many Coloradans don't think much of the law enforcement profession." He also added that, "Do you have any idea how hard it is for the men and women serving in this profession today? Do you know what it's like to say, 'I'm sorry for your loss,' and not be able to get the sound of a family member's screams and pain out of your mind? Do you know what it's like to show up at an accident scene where there are dead people and people still alive that need help? Do you know what it's like to give CPR to a 17-year-old kid, to be covered in blood, do everything you can to save his life, but then have him die anyway? Do you know what it's like to have someone spit in your face, tell you that they hope that your family members die?" You know, good police work and common sense police reform go together. They are and they must happen simultaneously, and it's the only way we're going to restore the broken trust between law enforcement and our communities, and particularly our communities of color. We as a community need to recognize and appreciate the important work that officers do every day, and officers need to understand that the status quo is unsustainable and that reforms are desperately needed to achieve the goal of policing, and that's ensuring that everyone can be safe in our communities, no matter their race, no matter their background. Now, today is a significant step. It's the right direction, but let's not kid ourselves. No one is under the illusion that criminal justice issues exist in a vacuum. No one bill or policy change can possibly undo centuries of systemic and institutional racism. Police reform is a constructive part of a much larger puzzle, but we also need to look at the whole picture: educational equity, addressing disparities in healthcare and housing and employment, environmental justice, economic opportunity. Our systems reflect our values, and if we're really going to live up to the values upon which this nation was founded, we know that we need to change our systems, both from the bottom up and from the top down. And to continue this work, we need to make sure that we have the will to do so, even after the protests die down. Things cannot go back to normal. We need to create a new normal where everyone's rights are respected, where Black Americans feel safe going about their daily lives, and where Black lives matter. James Baldwin once wrote, quote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced," end quote. By facing the cold, hard truth about the unequal treatment of Black Americans and communities of color, we can and we will create real change that will materially improve the lives of countless Americans of this generation and future generations. And we can bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice. With that, it's my honor to introduce one of the lead sponsors of this bill, a veteran and president of the Colorado State Senate, Senator Leroy Garcia.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Governor Polis. Thank you all for being here and part of this monumental piece of legislation. For Colorado to be leading the country at such an important policy and juncture and at a pivotal time in our nation's history is telling. It's telling of our commitment in Colorado. It's telling of the bipartisan spirit that has come together around this important and meaningful legislation, and telling that enough is enough. We need actions, and that our communities are demanding justice, and that it was time for meaningful change to happen. Senate Bill 217 brings about greater accountability, transparency, and increased integrity to law enforcement. The policies in Senate Bill 217 are not new. Matter of fact, they're the result of decades of conversations and sadly also decades of police departments that turn a blind eye to unacceptable behavior. We share in the Colorado General Assembly the responsibility to build trust between communities and law enforcement. And I'm proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish together, accomplishing the change that the people of Colorado demand. I'll now turn it over to my good colleague, Representative Leslie Herod.
Thank you, Senator Garcia, Governor Polis, Senator Rhonda Fields, Representative Gonzalez-Gutierrez, for standing with me in this bill. I will tell you all that I've been working on these issues for a long time. As the Vice Chair of the Judiciary Committee and someone who was elected to represent Denver, but from Colorado Springs, I have committed to my constituents that I will continue to work on issues of equality and justice. I will tell you that when I saw the video of Devon Bailey, to say that I was heartbroken isn't enough. I was angry, I was frustrated, and I felt like I needed to do more with the responsibility of being an elected official to step up and speak out for my community. Law enforcement, for too long, has been able to target communities of color without retribution, without accountability, and unfortunately some without the integrity that we expect from those who are there to serve and protect us. I have worked with law enforcement to talk about how we can change the culture, how we can ensure that those who need to be held accountable are held accountable, and those officers who would do harm to our communities would no longer be able to wear a shield. This bill came from those conversations with chiefs, with frontline officers, with people in the community who said we have to do something different. I don't feel comfortable speaking up, but I stand behind you in your quest for justice. But in running a bill, and initially thinking about a bill specifically to deal with the fleeing felon law, and for those of you all who don't know, I think it's appropriate that we abolish this law today because the fleeing felon law has vestiges in slavery and Jim Crow. Saying if you suspect someone of being a felon, or someone looks like they could be a felon, African American, and they run away, they could be shot in the back. We've seen it happen all too often. The presence of blackness is a threat to too many and should never be an excuse to kill someone. But when I initially brought the bill forward, I was told that we weren't going to have support to just abolish the fleeing felon exemption. It wasn't until the cries of the protesters outside of this very building that that tone changed. And yes, the call for justice around the murder of George Floyd is what drove the change here in Denver. But we must remember the names of the folks right here in Colorado who have lost their lives at the hands of law enforcement. Devon Bailey, Elijah McClain. These are the names I thought of as I pushed this bill forward, probably a bit relentlessly, because I knew it was time for change. Dr. King speaks of the urgency of now, and we are in that moment right now. There is such a thing as being too late. We were too late for Devon Bailey. We're too late for Elijah McClain. But their deaths do not have to be in vain. The urgency of now tells us to act today, to bring justice to these families, to change the law in Colorado, and to hold law enforcement accountable. And those who are not, those who do wrong and do harm to our community, should face criminal charges, be put in jail, and civil charges. This bill does that. This bill is not the end-all, be-all. It doesn't change culture. I can't legislate culture change. I can't legislate hate out of someone's heart. But what we can do is take a big step in the right direction and continue to commit to working on these issues. So I want to thank the families of the victims who are here today, the Bailey family, for continuing to fight for justice. And I want to make one more note before I'm done. I want to be clear because this has gotten lost in the conversation. This bill was led by women of color. This bill was led by the Black and Brown Caucus. This bill came from a call from the Black Caucus to demand change from the House and the Senate. And I will tell you that when we asked President Garcia to be on board, there was not a hesitation, because he too understands what it's like to be a Black or a brown person walking down the street and fear for their life when they come across the path of law enforcement officers. No, not all law enforcement officers are bad, but the ones that are need to be held accountable. That's what this bill does. So again, I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank Elizabeth Epps with the Colorado Freedom Fund, Mari Newman, who's been fighting for justice for so long, the ACLU, and so many others who have stepped in to make this bill a reality. Thank you.